Welcome to a new episode of Crafting with Cosplay Fabrics. My name is Indra and today I'm going to show you how to sew. A lot of the tutorials that I make are with the idea that you already know how to sew and craft, and I have gotten some comments and messages about people who don't know how to sew, so I figured it would be a good idea to put together a tutorial on how to use a sewing machine. This is very basic, a little chaotic because it's not traditional, and I just want to show you some very basic, easy ways that you can just use a sewing machine. I'll show you my sewing machine and just some very basic ways that you can just start to sew. I hope that by having this tutorial, then you'll be able to use this, and that then you'll be able to maybe understand and use it with the other tutorials that I've done in the past, because now you'll be able to know what to do. So I hope that this helps you out, and let's get to it. Before we start, I wanted to talk really quick about my sewing machine. This is the one that I have, and I've had this one for many years. You don't need something like this, but I think this is a great sewing machine to learn with and to keep for a long time, especially because then you can use all the different kinds of stitches and stuff that this has. But if you're starting out, the only thing that you need is a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch. And sometimes it will be mechanical rather than these like electrical ones, like computerized ones. That's really fancy and it's awesome. You don't need that, especially if you are just kind of starting out, you're not sure what to buy. So I did want to show my sewing machine, and just so you get an idea of what it is that I'm going to be using. Even though my machine might be a little bit different, the basics of it are pretty much the same, so I'll try to explain as I go. When you first get a sewing machine, the first thing that I suggest for you to learn is how to thread your sewing machine. You'll have to look at your manual because all machines thread a little bit differently, but try to practice how to put the thread on from the top and on the bobbin, which is what goes like in here, the little one. I know that for sewing, a lot of the stuff can seem expensive, but trust me, there are things that are worth the price. For example, buying quality thread, because this could potentially ruin your sewing machine or your project. If you have a low quality thread or a thread that is not compatible with the fabric that you're using, then you can get like a total mess when you're sewing. The other thing is the little bobbins. Sometimes bobbins, they come in packs and it's like, oh, really cheap, but they might not be the right size for your sewing machine, so make sure that you do get the right one. And the next thing, once you learn how to thread your sewing machine, is you want to learn how to fill the bobbin, and your sewing machine could probably already do that. Mine, I can do it like right up here, and that's something that, again, it's a little bit different on each sewing machine, so refer to your manual for that. But once you have that set up, then you're good to sew. So let's get to it. All right, so at this point you should have already threaded your machine and it should be all good, and you now have your bobbin and you're ready to put it in and start sewing. So I wanted to show you this because this is, I think, a really important part. When you put your bobbin in, I do recommend lowering the needle, and how you do that is you'll see that little knob right over here on the side, and what you want to do is turn it towards you. Usually it's turning it, and just keep turning it until the needle goes down and up. And what that's gonna do is gonna catch the thread at the bottom and just pull that, and you'll see that the little tail of the bobbin came out. I'm trying to use bright thread so you can see. and just pull on that. I recommend to leave really long, like, thread tails. Some people really like to cut it short. I think that it's the easiest to just work with really long thread tails. So once you have that, then we are ready to sew. There are two things that you should learn very quickly, and that is to lower your needle and to lock your thread. So I'm going to show you how to do that first. Most machines that are electronic have these buttons that will do it automatically for you. If your machine is not like this, it might have like a little handle, or you might have to do it manually. So keep that in mind for a second. Put a pin on that because we're gonna go back to that in a sec. So I have just some scrap fabric here, and I'm just gonna use this to show you how to do all of these things. So once you have your fabric ready and everything, then you want to select how large you want your thread to be. I'm just doing a straight stitch right now, so I like using kind of like a middle one. So I'll just do like 3.5. So what I want to do is I want to lock my fabric in, otherwise it's not going to go anywhere. And there's a little handle back here. It's like a, let me show you. See it right there, and that will lower and lift the foot. This is the foot. So we're going to put our fabric in place and lower that foot. The next thing that you want to do is to lower your needle, and that's what I explained before. If your machine is one of these electrical ones, you could just press this and it'll do it automatically. If you don't have that, you can do it manually by turning the knob on the side again towards you. So I'm just gonna do it like this, and you see that that did it for me. So I'm ready to then just start sewing, and all you do is just press the pedal down very lightly, and you guide the fabric with your hands, and we'll just go slow for now. And if you're feeling a little more confident, then you can go a little faster. So that's one thing. If you are going to be sewing any garment at all, you absolutely have to learn how to lock your thread. So that's the next thing that I'm going to teach you. But then let's say that you are sewing, you have your needle down, you're done sewing, then you have to do the needle up. You can either press this button again or turn the knob again, and that releases it for you. You can stretch your fabric out, and my sewing machine happens to have like a little I don't know if you can see that, like a tiny little cutter on the side. You could just use a pair of scissors, but that's basically like just how to get started. So let's do the next, which is locking the thread. So if you are, the reason why you want to lock your thread is because it's what's going to keep the garment together. So I'm going to show you by putting two pieces together. I can fold this in half actually and show you. So I'm going to show you the difference. So first let's lock that thread. So what I want to do is lower my needle. We learned how to do that. Then what I'm going to do is sew like maybe 2 stitches. 2 stitches would be the needle going up and down maybe twice. 1, 2, well that's 3. That's fine. And then I'm going to press this. Your sewing machine might not have this automatic. Again, it might have like one of those, like it might look like a knob or a tab that you have to pull as you're sewing. But it'll look like this. It'll look like the U-turn signal. So you can press that and it'll do it automatically for you. And what that will do is it's going to sew backwards, which is going to lock your thread in, and then you keep sewing. So I'm ready to continue sewing. So for a little bit, okay. And then once I'm done, let's say I finish sewing that part, then I'm going to lock it again. I like doing maybe 2 or 3 of those. Okay, I'm ready. I'm gonna lift my needle again and lift that foot and cut that. So let me show you what that's going to do. You'll see that it like created like a little bit of a double stitch right there. And that is going to prevent this from like pulling apart. This is pulling apart because you'll see that it has that first, it didn't sew back all the way to that first stitch that I did. But from the point where it's double stitched, like locked in, it's not. Otherwise, trust me, when I first started to cosplay, I didn't know about this. And I had my costumes on and I didn't understand why my stitches were coming apart. And I'm pulling really hard on this. So as you can see, it'll keep your garment together. If you don't have that, trust me, the whole thing will just go completely undoing that stitch. So you want to lock your stitch. So next, now that we know the basics, this is like super basic, we're going to then how to sew straight. So there's a few things that you can do. Just teaching you kind of in a very chaotic way, but I feel like most cosplayers kind of work this way. First, it's going to help if you work on a table. I understand that there are people who love working on the floor. Trust me when I say that it's going to make your life way easier if you work on a table and that you are comfortable where you are sitting. It's a lot easier to get straight stitches this way. Most sewing machines also have, you'll see it's like a little grid line, and you can use, let's say that you have your fabric and you want to sew it straight. Basically, you want the edge, the very, very edge. Let's see if I can zoom that in. You want that edge of the fabric to run it always as you're sewing. Continue to follow that little line. Or if you want to sew a little bit more in, you can follow any of these. Let's say maybe over here. So as I'm sewing, I'm trying to have this edge always follow that one line. What I like to do, which is kind of like cheater method, is I actually like to have my fabric right on the edge of the foot of this, and that usually gets me the cleanest results. And based on the placement of my needle, because I can have, see if you see my needle is all the way to the left, so this is about maybe 1/4 of an inch, and I like that sort of give, because then if I need to take it in a little bit more, then I can just go back in. I'd rather do that than have to completely take apart the garment, and then I have holes in my fabric, and then it's like, it's a lot easier to take stuff in than have to take stuff out, if that makes sense. So this is my kind of cheater method. And just a quick thing also that helps me is when I'm sewing, I try to have my threads back. So you'll see that it helps a lot to just have them back. So I put my foot down and I try to match it up to the very edge of the fabric. So needle down, then sew like 2-3 stitches, lock that, and then we're gonna keep sewing. And I'm gonna keep this edge with this, and that should give me a straight stitch. Okay, and then back stitch to lock that in, and then needle up. All right, and as you can see, that gave me a very even and straight stitch. And that, as you can see, I'm pulling hard on this, is not breaking it apart. So that's the very basic of putting stuff together. So the next thing that I want to show you is using pins. So I have some straight pins here, and you something that's very easy is to use one of the wrist pin cushions. We do have a tutorial for that, which really helps, and you'll see why in just a minute. But I did want to reference that because it's also super helpful when you are starting to sew. So when you are sewing, okay. So I have two pieces here, and I want to put these two together. The easiest way to pin your fabric is going to be, so I'm putting these two together right here. You want to do it this way instead of this way. So there are two reasons why. There will be moments where you'll find it easier to do it with this method, but traditionally you want to do it this way. Most of the times when you're doing this, the fabric can pull as you're sewing, and you'll actually end up losing exactly the placement where you have this. The other reason is because this way you can actually sew right through with the pins on. It's a lot easier to also take the pins off as you're sewing. So I'm going to show you that. I'm going to just pin this twice. So let's say that you have that fabric together. All right, and placing this right up against that edge, needle down, sew about 2 stitches, lock that stitch, do that twice, then keep sewing. So I'm going to show you the first one, how you can sew right over the pin. See? And it didn't do anything. Sometimes though, as you can see, the pin's a little bit like moved because it kind of catches. But when you do it like this, actually let me show you the difference. I'm going to pin this one like this to show you. When you are sewing and you're doing this, you can easily stop right at where the pin is, rather than this where you have this much more space if you have to remove the pin, because you don't want it to, you can't sew right over this. So there is the big difference in why I suggest doing that. But anyways, let's say that you have that done. So let's lock our stitch and put our needle up. There you go. The next stitch that I want to show you really quick is the zigzag stitch. And this is a stitch that is perfect for two things. One, to lock the edges of your fabrics, you know, that way if it's like fraying or something, you can use that for that. And the other one is that zigzag stitches are the best for any stretchy fabric. So I will show you those two things. And I'll also show you something you can do with the zigzag stitch. So first, let me just select the zigzag stitch for me. And with zigzag stitches, you have to consider two things. You have to consider the length of the stitch, so of the zigzag, and the width. I like an average, so I'll just do like two, about like a 2 length. And you can play around with it and see which one you prefer for your project. And the width, well, let's say 4.5. That's just like an average kind of thing, at least for my machine and what I like. So same concept. You line up to the edge or where you want it to sew, lower the needle, and this time you're gonna want to zigzag it a few times and then back stitch that, and then keep sewing. And then same thing, lock that thread, and then needle up. So that's how you sew a zigzag. Obviously you can see that it's like puckering my fabric a little bit because of the current tension that I have on my machine, but you get the idea. Something that you can do with zigzag stitching, so this is something that you want to use for when you're using stretchy fabrics. That's how you put them together, with a zigzag and not a straight stitch. But another thing that you can do with the zigzag is to do the edges of your fabric. So let's say that you don't have a serger and you might have a fabric that is fraying a lot. This one is just a cotton and it kind of frays, but not too terribly. But it's always a good idea to fix all of your edges. That'll give you the cleanest project and it'll make your stuff last a lot longer. So what I want to do is I want to place my fabric so that it's right at the middle of where the zigzag will be. So that's like about there. And we're gonna do the thing that we've been doing. Lower the needle, do a few stitches, then lock that stitch, and then keep sewing. And try to stay right at the middle. Okay, and then again, lock that, and then lift the needle. So that will give you a completely clean edge. And this actually kind of rolls in the fabric. So you see, look at the difference of like here where it's frayed. So that's one thing that you can do with the zigzag. Another thing is using it for satin stitching. So I'm just gonna double this up so that it shows up better. So what satin stitching is, it is a decorative kind of stitch that what you do is you want the length and the length of the zigzag to be very, very tight. So I'm going to just lower this. We'll say let's say 4, and we'll leave it at that width that we had. So same thing, lower that needle, do like a stitch or two, and lock that in. Okay, so because this kind of stitch is very, very tight, you want to kind of guide the fabric through, because it can bunch up at the bottom and it won't move because the stitch is so close together. All right, and then we'll lock that and lift that needle. So let me show you. If you pull too much when this is sewing, you're going to get this kind of thing happening. So you want to guide it through, but you want it to stitch. And as you can see, you can make it even tighter or kind of figure out what the best placement for your needle and fabric will be. This is just to show you a quick way of like how you can have this really pretty decorative kind of stitch by just using a zigzag. And that's it. I know that it's something that's going to take a lot of practice and patience, but you totally got this. When I first started to cosplay, I basically taught myself how to sew, And a lot of the techniques and things that I learned were completely like happenstance, or things that I picked up from other cosplayers or from family members, or things that along the way I kind of simplified for myself. So I try to, in a very layman's terms and kind of going over the same things, that this helps you if you've never sewed before, or maybe if you just bought a sewing machine or want to and don't really know what to do. It's actually very easy. It's all about practice and patience. I know that it can be really frustrating at first, but trust me, you can do it and you can make some amazing costumes. You just have to try. So I hope that you like this tutorial. I hope that you found it useful. I hope that you like and subscribe, and I will see you very soon for another tip, trick, or tutorial featuring Cosplay Fabrics. Bye!